It's hard to believe that the Zelda series has been around for at least 35 years. The very first game came out back in 1986 for the NES, and then it had a sequel that came out on the NES called Adventure of Link, which was Zelda 2, I believe. And that came out, I believe, in 1987. And that game was kind of considered the black sheep of the first three Zelda games that came out between the mid 80s and early 90s, because when we got to Link to the Past, when we got to that, the gameplay was very different. In fact, it was like a modified version of the original Zelda game that came out in '86. And Link to the Past, I believe, was on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And all three of those games are classics, but when you look at Adventure of Link, that game is actually supposed to be an ending to, or one of the few endings to the entire series, because little did I know when I was younger, every Zelda game that came out after Adventure of Link onwards was basically a prequel or a game that took place in an alternate reality depending on what happened in the Ocarina of Time game from 1998. And it's kind of strange because you have Link's Awakening, which came out back in, I believe it was 93 for Game Boy. Turns out that game was actually supposed to be a prequel to the original Zelda game from 86. And then Link to the Past is supposed to be, I guess, a prequel to Link's Awakening. And I think it's supposed to go before Oracle of Seasons or Oracle of Ages, depending on how you look at the timeline, because the timeline in the Zelda series has been something that has been a subject of debate for many, many years. And a lot of people are wondering whether or not Nintendo, I guess, had this elaborate multi-universe timeline planned out since the 80s, and it's highly doubtful. But it doesn't change the fact that almost every Zelda game that has been released since the 80s has been a masterpiece. A lot of people speak highly of Ocarina of Time, and Ocarina of Time is such a great game. It got nearly perfect, I guess, scores from various gaming publications, and it's universally acclaimed. A lot of people have nothing but good things to say about it. It's one of the best games from the 90s, and depending on what happens in Ocarina of Time, you basically get three different, I guess, futures. One future is if the hero is defeated. Two of them is if the hero is successful, depending on what happens in Ocarina of Time. And one of them leads to Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, which is basically a darker world. And one of them leads to Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, which is a new world. And then, the main, I guess, and some people will say this is probably the main timeline, considering the fact that the 1986 game came out first. One of the timelines is Hyrule's Decline and The Last Hero, which had the games I just mentioned, Adventure of Link, Link's Awakening, the original Zelda game, and Link to the Past. But then before Ocarina of Time, you discover that games like Four Swords and The Minish Cap and Skyward Sword, those are all prequels to Ocarina of Time, which is very interesting because the more games that Nintendo make in the Zelda series, the more intriguing it becomes. And the fact that Nintendo has been able to get at least 30 years of storytelling out of this franchise is astounding. And I don't think there's been any other video game series that's ever done storytelling like Nintendo has with The Legend of Zelda. And the thing is, we're still waiting for Breath of the Wild 2, which is supposed to be coming out sometime in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, the storytelling in Legend of Zelda is incredible, but at the same time, it's one of the more complex timelines that you'll see in any type of video game. And I do feel that Nintendo will probably never run out of ideas. I don't think Nintendo's going to finish up the Zelda series anytime soon because it's in demand. It's quite possible that Nintendo just continued making games over time because there was just a higher demand for it. There's just more people who want to see more and more Zelda games. And the thing is, the storytelling aspect is even better than what you would see in, I guess, Super Mario, because for the most part, Super Mario is pretty much linear. It seemed like every game that has come out has basically been a sequel to its prequel, while the storyline or the timeline with Zelda is non-linear, and basically there's always a new story to tell, whether it be from one of the timelines, like whether, it's the New World timeline or the Dark World timeline or a prequel to Ocarina of Time. There's always an intriguing story to tell that can keep people hooked on the series and just get people to spend money to buy it on whatever game system that Nintendo decides to come out with. So yeah, The Legend of Zelda has one of the most complex timelines in gaming history, but at the same time, I don't think you're ever going to see another video game franchise that does a timeline similar to how Nintendo has done with Zelda over the past 35 years.